jig on. There we go, a man's got a hula hoop. This is the perfect introduction for the wonderful, the amazing Andy!
Thank you very much, man. Thank you. Okay, so over the years I've worked with literally dozens of startup founders through the agency I run, Clearleft, through the CAMP mentoring service, and just from coming to events like this. And this talk is basically an answer really to a lot of the problems and a lot of the reoccurring questions that I hear these sort of startup founders sort of say. Particularly a focus on technology over design. So this is sort of my response to that. When you're trying to create something that's never existed before, like this Death Star, and it solves a particularly annoying problem, in this case, the rebel scum, you don't really care how well it's been designed. You just want the problem to go away. Now, I see this lack of concern about design in many, many early stage products. Like this electric hairdryer, like these electric curlers, or this device that was designed to cure ladies in Victorian times from hysteria. If you're familiar with hysteria, if you're not looking up on Wikipedia, you might be surprised what this device is actually intended to do. Some of you might be able to work it out. It's clear from these examples that the aesthetics and user experience were not even considered when these devices were created. They were first and foremost seen as engineering problems.
They're big in Japan.
Oh yes, oh wow, we can buy it on your service, fantastic. However, in the rush to market, many of these products contain critical flaws, like the electric curler's tendency to set their customers' hair on fire. And if that happens, you know, you're kind of a little bit stuck. Now, despite these flaws, you'll always find a few early adopters. In fact, most of the people who are working in the tech scene, I know it takes a couple of seconds to kind of get the jokes, you know, people who are working in the current tech scene, and most of you founders probably fall into that early adopter market. You're the kind of people that are willing to use your product for the value it brings, irrespective of whether it makes you look like a twat using it. Now, if you're not careful, this can give you, and those companies, this sort of false sense of that they've hit the jackpot. Sadly, over time, less forgiving customers will come in, and they'll start to notice all the little flaws about your product. They'll notice that your product's ugly. You'll notice that your product is kind of confusing, and if you guys can work out which way you drive into this entrance, you're a better man than me. Or if you've ever been in a foreign country and you don't speak the language and you've tried to buy a subway ticket, it's almost impossible to use. And if this stuff happens, it's basically game over for your idea. Because someone will come along who's younger and who's smarter and who's more talented and has more time than you and will outdo you. Now, obviously, this is a silly slide, but I went to speak at the Next Web conference the year before last. They had 2 tech founders under 13 presenting to an audience of 1,000 people. So this is not actually a joke. So all of you people in the room who are 22 years or older, you're already kind of getting to be a little bit past it. I'm sorry to say that, but you know, this is the truth of the matter. Now, in the early stages, these people will try and outdo you on a few technical fronts. They'll try and make a version of your product that's smaller. They'll try and make a version of your product that's faster. Or they'll pack it full of loads of really, really useful features that are going to kind of obviously outdo you in the market. Incidentally, I think the only reason that the internet fridge exists is because the cost of Wi-Fi units and screens has come down so much that they're a fraction of the actual overall cost of the white good. And when that happens, it just becomes like, you know, sort of just a pointless thing just to kind of put in there. It costs you no money. Sadly, I see a lot of featureitis happen in startups where something is so cheap and easy, they throw it in there no matter what the outcome or what the problem they're trying to solve. Kind of reminds me sort of the 80s, which kind of is sort of like, you know, telling you how old I am, where everything had a freaking digital like watch, like timepiece in it. Like, why would you want a pen that told you the time? I don't know. I wanted one. I didn't know why I wanted it. It's a classic case of design being driven by what's technically possible rather than what's actually useful or desirable. Now, competing on technology is great for a while. However, over time, the engineering advances alone won't really be compelling anymore. And very quickly, your must-have product will just turn into a commodity. And when that happens, you'll wake up one morning and your super sexy startup product, you'll find that you're no longer in the innovation business, you're in the commodity business. And that's a really shitty business to be in because frankly, the margins are tiny. Now sadly, this is when most traditional companies start thinking about design, they panic. And this is partly due to pressure from other competitors. It's partly down to consumer demand wanting fresher, newer designs every year. It's partly down to design trends. Now the interesting thing is what you're seeing here is you're seeing effectively 100 years of product innovation of those 3 products I showed you at the start of this talk. One of the things I find really interesting is everything, particularly targeted at women, ends up tending to have gold plating on it. I'm not really sure what that's about, but the problem I think that you guys are facing is you don't have 100 years of product innovation. If you're lucky, you have 3 or 4. You've seen people talk about their startups, their 1,000 days worth of effort. They've had to condense 100 years of innovation down into maybe a couple of years, maybe in a couple of months. That's really hard. Now, when most people think about design, they think about aesthetics. And aesthetics are important. After all, you can use beauty to drive desire, and you can set yourself apart from the competition. So, you know, for instance, if you think about the headphone market, it was a market that, 3 or 4 years ago, it was like there was just loads of little small providers. No one really owned it. Then along came Beats by Dr. Dre. And they invested in design. And in 18 months, they basically owned that market. A market where everyone else said it was impossible to dominate. Now, the interesting thing is they didn't own it through superior technology. In fact, a lot of audios will say that these headphones are really inferior in terms of audio quality. They did it through design. However, it amazes me how few digital-focused companies actually have managed to do the same thing and use design to create compelling brands. Now, aesthetics would take you only so far. As anyone who has tried to use Philip Stark's Juicy Salif to actually get juice out of an orange, it looks beautiful, but it gets more juice on your hands and the counter than it does actually in the cup. So good design is much, much more than just what something looks like. It's how it behaves when it's being used. Now, the problem I see with a lot of new products is they're designed by the super users. They're designed by people like you that know the market, the MD, the editor, the head of marketing. And you just want to sort of cram it through with all of the useful features you've been crying out for years, that you wish there was a product that services this need. Unfortunately, if you're a super user and you're designing your own product, it will end up looking like this. It's great for the other few people out there that have the same skills as you, but it's a nightmare to learn if you're anyone sort of normal like me. Well, that's presuming I'm normal, but anyway. One of the benefits of good design is that it can bring the ability to simplify, to ditch that which is confusing or unnecessary and focus on the core of the product, bring it down into its beautiful essence. And this will help you cross the chasm in startup terms into a mainstream audience. An audience that just wants your new product to work and work seamlessly. However, no matter how smart you are, how elegant a thinker, how many brilliant strategies and things you've created around the drawing room, it's only until you put something in the hands of your real users that you actually figure out how they use it and what it's like. So one of your jobs, and particularly if you're in a larger company, the job of product managers, is to almost develop an obsessive understanding of your users. Maybe you don't live in their attics and spy on them like this awesome German movie, but you need to kind of thoroughly understand people's motivations, and one way of doing this is through usability. Now, if you're still unsure what good design looks like, I urge you to look at the work of Dieter Rams, legendary brawn designer, influencer of most of Apple's products. And he created these 10 principles of design for brawn. And I think this, for me, typifies the essence of what companies like Clearleft are trying to get at. I think it's also a really good strategy or practice for you guys to run some kind of design principles exercise when you're starting your own product to try and figure out what your design principles are. Because design principles are a great way of turning all the big thinking strategy you have at the startup stage and embedding it in your product so it takes all the way into the actual manifestation of the product. Because every time you come to a decision or crossroads, you can look at your design principles and say, does it match these values that we have? If not, we should throw it away. If it does, let's move forwards. For me, good design is like a Scandinavian detective story. It involves basically picking up all the pictures, all the ideas of the problem, all the clues, mapping out on a big board, pulling together all the patterns and pattern recognition. As humans, we're great at pattern recognition, and designers, the best designers are native pattern recognizers. Sadly, the best designers will play out on their hunches. Not every hunch is going to be correct, but you need to give them the space to sort of explore some of these hunches and sort of go to their logical conclusions. The bad designers are kind of like the sort of incompetent detectives that go and try and sort of label the first person they think is the most likely person to have committed the crime and throw them in prison. And if you're episode 2 of a 24 episode kind of Scandinavian drama, you had a pretty good idea that that's probably not the person that did it. So don't just jump to conclusions, explore, be like a detective story. And I have to admit that like when I'm sort of asked to kind of observe design studios and designers within their natural habitat, if their office or their desk doesn't look like some crimes happened, I don't think they're doing it right. So when you go back to your offices tomorrow, make sure that what you see in your designer's desk space looks more like this and not just a blank desk. Now designers for years have had a whole multitude of tools to help them figure out how design should work, and one of the most popular ones, if you go to any design conferences, is the Kano model. Now the Kano model is a lovely, delightful tool, and it can really help you figure out how to prioritize features and functions in your startup. So basically what you've got is this sort of lower arc, which is basic expectations. So if I check into a hotel, I expect there to be a bed. If there's a bed in the room, I'm not going to tweet, yes, bed for the win, awesome hotel. It's just a basic expectation. There's a whole bunch of features that you probably have which you're trying to figure out whether they should go in there or not. And you need to put the basic expectations in there. It's just, even if it's not sexy, it might not be sort of high up on your prioritization list, but they just have to go in there or clients will be disappointed. You then have the performance payouts. And they're the things, if you give more of, people will buy more of. So it used to be the case, for instance, 5-6 years ago, the more storage that Dropbox or Apple or Google would give you, the happier you'd feel. Unfortunately, what happens is over time is these performance payouts become commodities. They become the basic expectations. So now when you sign up to any cloud-based service, you expect gigabytes of data, whereas like a few years ago, you would have paid hundreds, if not thousands of pounds for that. Same is true of a hotel. You go in and you expect bigger and bigger and bigger like TVs, flat panel TVs. But then you have these things called delighters. These are small little things, often can be really, really cheap, that make the difference from the experience. The chocolate on the pillow, for instance. However, adding stuff like this into your product isn't the type of thing that you'd see on an average Kanban board. These nice little features are usually the first thing that gets sort of thrown out when people are thinking of functionality in order to make it faster, to make it better, to make it bigger. Ironically, the lean and agile process often kind of helps cutting out these sort of value adds. So it's your designers and your design thinking and your product thinking that helps secure and save these little problems and projects or little features to go in and make a delightful experience. I think there's a whole bunch of companies that are delivering delight in this way. We've talked about MailChimp a few times. I think they're a great company. Basically they just sell email marketing, send email marketing sort of, spam. Lovely, delightful emails. But they have this characterization. They play with design. They make people love them. So the people who are signing into MailChimp every day, they're greeted by a little joke or a little sort of friendly character. People really love coming back. They've delivered this sort of connection. Zappos is another oft-used example for companies that are really great at delighting their experience and delighting their users. So another sort of one of my sort of favourite kind of design thinkers is this guy called Seth Godin, who's also been mentioned a few times. And he talks about the idea that the power of design that could be so strong that he thinks you should eliminate marketing from your budget entirely. Just focus on building amazing, delightful products. And if you focus on those products, people will tell other people, it would be word of mouth marketing, and that's, building brilliant products is kind of the way forward. Rather than building mediocre products, then spending loads of time on marketing and advertising and PR. Now, I think it's not quite that simple, and I think you do need to spend a little bit of time on these sort of usual channels. But I see so many people building mediocre products and then spending huge amounts of money to try and convince people to buy them, which is the wrong way round. A good example of this sort of attitude is Dropbox. So when Dropbox first started, they did the usual thing of search engine marketing. So they'd buy a whole bunch of keywords. They found themselves spending between $233 and $388 per user for a product that costs about $100. Now, I'm no MBA, but I know that that's probably not a really good long-term business. It's not a good short-term business anyway. So instead, they decided to drop all of their search engine marketing spend and focus on building the best product they could in the marketplace. And their CEO and founder said, we spent almost all of our effort making an elegant and simple product that just worked and made users happy. And in the end of the day, that's what we're talking about. I know a lot of the talk today has been, happy startup, we're making ourselves happy, and I think that's lovely, and we need to start with that. But I think that needs to spread out, and our jobs as founders shouldn't be necessarily just trying to build our own nest egg so we can go and do stuff just for ourselves. I think we also need to spread that and make products that your users love. And that's the mission I think you need to have to be a great founder, to try and build the best product possible and make everyone happy and everyone successful. Because that's ultimately what we're doing here. Now, I think this leads to some kind of amazing triple threat, a product like Nest, which is focused on user needs, which is beautifully designed, and which sells itself. And this is a thermostat. This is the most unsexy thing you can imagine. So if you can build an object of desire, of lust, that features in design magazines, that basically tells whether your house is too warm or too cold, you can do it with any product. You just need that thought and imagination. However, it ain't that easy. If you study for an MBA, one of the things that you'll learn really early on is you need to create a product that is defensible, that somehow is so difficult to replicate in the market that you have some kind of lead or your competition just can't sort of beat you. It used to be the case that technology was that area of defensibility. You would hire the best CTO, you'd hire the best tech team, you'd be up and running and no one could compete. However, technology has now become a commodity game. It's really unlikely that you're going to create a defensible product purely on technology alone. And once your idea is out there, the idea is really difficult to defend either, through IP, through copyright. I see design as one of the key business differentiators that companies have left. Because truly good design takes time, truly good design takes money, and truly good design takes a degree of talent that most people do not have. So even if you see like these German brothers that go out and replicate American startups time and time again, they're hugely successful, but when you look at the design, they're nowhere near in comparison to what the people they're copying are doing. And a lot of people are trying this. You look at companies like Nokia, and they've been trying for years and years and years to sort of like build design into their culture. Weirdly, they've done a very good job. They've got some of the best designers in the world. But that design never gets released into the market. It gets stopped. I don't know why. Like they've got innovation teams. When I've spoken to their designers, they've designed like features like thumb print recognition in their phones 4 or 5 years ago, and they're really frustrated when Apple does this. And they're like, well, we thought of this. And it's like, well, that's great, but you didn't release it. So it's being stopped. These ideas are being stopped. The designers are coming up with these ideas, and there's somewhere in the business process that's kind of just chopping these out. Often middle management. So you need to kind of watch out for that. So how do you do this? Well, you need great designers. However, unless you're a design-led company, it can be really hard to judge the quality of a designer. So what most people do is they go onto Dribbble or some other kind of like e-lancing, outsourcing kind of thing. They find the cheapest designer they can find, often in Eastern Europe. They give them, they tell them exactly what they want to achieve, and then they go away and basically summon up an identikit thing of what you've imagined. Now that's great, and if you've got very little money, it's sometimes tough to do anything else. But what you end up hiring is you end up hiring stylists. Somebody who's really good at mimicking designs, someone who's really good at giving you what you think you want. They'll spend time making you happy rather than actually trying to make your clients happy, and that's the wrong approach to design. Incidentally, does anyone know this guy in this TV show? Hands up if you got the nerve to admit it. Okay, this is a crazy TV show called Hair Battle Challenge, where they do things like create the Eiffel Tower of hair. And people have done the Eiffel Tower of hair in design. People have built beautiful, lickable interfaces, beautiful devices that get lauded in design magazines. But they're hollow, they're shallow, they have no spirit. They look pretty, but they're not well designed. So what most people do is they hire these sort of stylists, and then the design doesn't really work, so they hire someone else who's a little bit more expensive, and it doesn't really work, and they hire someone who's a little bit more expensive, it doesn't really work, and every second this happens, you see the end of the runway getting closer and closer and closer. And I've seen this happen to so many startups. I've advised startups every year, you need to hire good designers, you need to hire good designers. And every year they come back to me with the same problems. It's like, Andy, this product isn't working, but we don't know why. It's because your design is shit, because you've got bad talent. And then what happens is, sadly, they run out of money and you know, they blame other people for the problems rather than themselves. They needed to have that insight to realize that design was a key competitive advantage, and they missed the boat. So one of the key things I'd say is, like, try and hire the best designers you can afford as early as possible. There's this kind of myth that you hire cheap designers at the start, then you hire the better designers at the end. You need to flip that around completely. You need to hire the really, really good designers at the start to solve the big, deep, difficult challenges. And once they've solved those big, deep, difficult challenges, get rid of them and hire cheaper talent who can then take that vision and tweak and sort of morph it. But you've got that sort of solid bedrock. So instead of hiring stylists, you need to hire design thinkers. A lot of the problems I think people have been talking about this last couple of days in this room, they've not necessarily been startup problems or tech problems, they've been design problems. They might not seem design problems to you, but if you get a really good design thinker in a room with you for a few days, a week with a sketch pad, and you run through a bunch of exercises, they will probably be able to hone in on those problems and solve them for you really quickly. And considering half of the audience here seem to be consultants, you should be running around and trying to get these people's help. So, I think if you can't afford to hire great designers, I understand, the next best thing is to hire or find a really good design co-founder. Because it's increasingly rare to find successful, particularly Silicon Valley startups that weren't co-founded by an amazing designer. Usually because basically they build a better product. You know, so it makes sense. If you're going to go and have a CTO on your board, you also need to have some kind of, you know, CXO, customer experience officer, somebody in charge of the product or the offering. And like I say, it's being really common now. If you look at some of the most successful startups in San Francisco, they have this design focus at their heart. So I think Lean Startup has helped here. I think Lean Startup has been a really positive effect to the design community or to the tech community and startup community. Because a lot of the things that they talk about in Lean Startup are basically the things that the design community has been saying all along. It's not about thinking in Photoshop. It's about understanding the kind of core of a product and service. It's about getting out of the building and going talking to your users, talking to your customers. And actually, if you see, or if you've been involved in any of these kind of like accelerator programs or Luxor, which was a really, really good sort of incubator type sort of service in San Francisco that sort of closed a while ago, you know, they'd take you in for like a 30-day program, but like on day 2 or day 3, they'd have you going out into the street talking to users. So think about like how often and when was the last time you actually talked to your customers, and try and build in that kind of iteration and learning cycle into your development. One of the things I don't like about Lean Startup and the current sort of fetishization of startups is analytics. I go to talk after talk after talk where they kind of say, hey, you don't really need to have design talent. All you need to do is like follow the trends. You know, just see what's going on in your analytics and kind of like, you know, pivot. And I think analytics are great. I think analytics are basically like a GPS in a car. I wouldn't go anywhere really without my GPS because it gives me a really useful tool or a really useful guide. But if I try and get to my destination wearing a blindfold, only taking the instructions from the GPS, I'm going to crash within about 30 seconds. So analytics are the same. Analytics are a guide. They're not your only guide. They're just one of a number of inputs. Because if you don't stop and look out of your startup window every now and again, what's going on in the real world, you'll be like this lorry driver in England that went down a one-way street because his GPS told him to and couldn't get back out. He got stuck. So you need to start building a design culture within your organizations. And having a design co-founder is one of the ways to do this. In the same way as a CTO can bring in this great understanding of technology, a great designer, at least at the start, can bring in an understanding and an appreciation of design amongst everyone on your team. Because ultimately, design is a team sport. Even if you have a single great designer, it's not only his or her responsibility to build design, it's everyone's responsibility. In the same way as it's not just your QA team's responsibility to kind of look for bugs and fix issues, it's the whole team. So, you know, and what you tend to find basically is if you go to a lot of startup events, which I do, you know, a lot of the startup founders will tell you that they're not investing in your idea. I'm sorry to tell you this, but your ideas probably aren't worth a huge amount. What they're doing is they're investing in your team. They're investing in an amazing group of people that have the talent, that have the vision to deliver. And maybe your first idea won't be perfect and you'll pivot and you'll go to a second or third idea. But they're looking for people that have this sort of set of overlapping skills, and that's the thing people invest in. It's also the thing that a lot of startups are buying now. I know at least 2 people, friends of mine that ran agencies in San Francisco. One of them got bought out by Twitter, one of them got bought out by Facebook, purely for the strength of their design team. That never used to happen 4 or 5 years ago. You'd hear of acqui-hires for engineers. It's starting to happen with design. So if Facebook and Google and Twitter are valuing design, Twitter, out of interest, they've got a massive design team for something as simple as Twitter. I was chatting to Mike Davison, who's a friend of mine, who's their head of design, and they were talking about trying to hire a usability testing team of about 20 people. Imagine that, 20 people testing Twitter every single day. This stuff's important. So I want to leave you with 3 things, basically. 3 things I think you guys need to do to make better startups. You need to realize design adds value. It's a value add, and a really important one. I think you need to build a culture of design within your organization, within your startup. I think you need to hire the best designers you can afford. Thank you very much.